Precious, precious water. In today's chat, I'll be talking about how water, the element, weaves its way, or rather flows its way, through the 5-element chirology system of hand reading. I'm Jennifer. I'm a chirology and palmistry practitioner and teacher and author based in Johannesburg, and I'm here to support you in your study of how to read people's hands. Water in chirology represents emotion. Much as the earth element represents that which is physical, water is now slightly less tangible. Remember, I talked to you about the principle of graduated materiality, which is how we describe how the elements manifest in a graduated scale from the most dense to the most refined. Earth, one can see, one can touch, it has form, whereas water, although you can see and touch it, it has no form, so it's vibrating at a slightly more rapid frequency. Water's primary principle, is I feel. And in the analogy that I chose in the earlier video of a weaving, the water is the texture of the hand reading experience. And the symbol that we use for water is a circle, and the color is blue. And once again, I must mention that this illustration I'm showing you has no relationship whatsoever to the chakras. It merely represents that of which we are composed. In other words, the 5 elements. In the element system, we have what we call the language of the elements. What we do is we look to the elements in nature, to the way they behave, and then we map those qualities over onto the human experience. Let's look at water. Water is cohesive. Water attaches itself to water. A drop of water will try to find its way to the great body of water, i.e. the ocean. Now, that concept mapped over onto the human trait would be that a watery person, a person with many water features in their hands, would, for example, need lots of friends, they'd make great networkers, they'd be good in PR, and so on. I think you get where I'm going with this. So the water hand shape is an oblong palm with long fingers, and these are those very elegant, artistic-looking hands. And those are the people that give the beautiful dinner parties. They love the most finest china and linen and so on, and glassware and so on. And water people, for example, will always elevate. They always look for that which is beautiful. Another interesting principle of water is perseverance. Think of the great ocean and how incredibly powerful it is. And in fact, scientifically, water is the strongest of all elements. Water will destroy anything in time. And people with a lot of water characteristics in their hands might be very persevering people. And they might be very much very determined in their own subtle ways to get what they want. Another very interesting principle of water is sensitivity. We all know how sensitive water people might be, being the most emotional of the elements. Water people might also, for example, have incredibly vivid imaginations, and so on. So our language of the elements provides us with lists and lists of various positive and not so positive meanings, or rather qualities and traits and characteristics that we then map over onto the human person who has that particular hand shape, those particular lines which are governed by water, that particular skin texture that might be governed by water, the fingerprint patterns that are also governed by water, and so on. So everything in the hand breaks down into an associated element, as I've said before. So it's a very simple sort of categorization of these various markings and features of the hands. And then we refer to this language of the elements to find our meanings. Working with the 5-element system of chirology is a lot to do with learning the vocabulary. And included in the vocabulary is this concept of the 5 realms, which describes the counseling and coaching context for hand reading in the 5-element system, that is. And in that particular level, that layer, that strata, the water layer, we're looking at the emotional balance of the person, we're looking at their relationships, and we're looking also at their intimate lives, their sexuality. And then a further thing that we add in there is social conscience, what we do to give back in our society. That would also be governed under the water level within the 5 realms of counseling and coaching. The work of a hand reader requires a lot of water principles. For example, forgiveness. Very interesting. One needs to forgive oneself for erring, and also forgive the client, a client who might present with something like, one of my worst things is shooting animals. It's something, you're sitting with somebody and they have a hobby of shooting animals, and obviously all the resistance and the judgment and so on that arises in me, I need to find a place for that and have compassion for this person. So there's a challenge. In other words, we embrace the water quality of forgiveness in the work that we do. Another thing is to have a strong service orientation. It's also water governed. Love, empathy, compassion, caring. These are water qualities. Important too for those of us who do the work of hand reading is to study the range of human emotion. For example, it's quite helpful to know the difference between anger and rage, or envy and jealousy. So deepening into the human, let's say, emotional scale is really going to give you more authority in the work that you do. And another aspect of the hand reading work that would be governed by water is having supervision. I'm sure you know that in psychology, those people who are studying to be therapists, and even once they've qualified, are required to be supervised by another therapist. So we need to unpack sometimes. The work is, I needn't tell you, quite challenging. You meet with all people with all sorts of terrible crises in their lives. And since we are required to assume our own authority, in other words, there's no governing body that gives us the cap of recognition. We're not endorsed, we're not actually qualified in the global sense to do this work. So one has a responsibility, and having some kind of supervision, in other words, checking in with someone who is in the therapeutic field, I definitely highly recommend. It'll help you a lot to manage your work with hand reading. And then lastly, I think I'll just mention that one's development of intuitive perception is to some extent linked to water. Overall, intuition is governed by chi, or the ether element in the technical scientific term of the 5 elements, but the chi is the terminology I use to represent the spiritual, those areas of the hand reading realm that are invisible. And the intuitive perceptions, though, are linked to water because water governs sensitivity. And one needs to become very sensitive to evolve your intuitive perceptions. Next week, I'll be talking about the fire element and how it plays out in the Chirology 5-element system of interpreting hands. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. See you next time. Bye for now.